Okay, I just wanted to say first of all that Dad and I are in the same house and he refused to sit next to me to record. He wanted
What?
to have his own room.
I
Independent
think
man.
very independent. Plus, fathers and parents tend to focus on their children in situations like this, and I needed to be have the clarity of purpose, and therefore to
Okay.
be in the other room looking at you two rather
Clarity of
than
purpose.
So what I'm hearing is Mal's distracting.
oh, I just spent 4 days with her up at Mount. So I can tell you how distracting she is. So
Okay, and then the second thing is Dad is, as you know, McKenna, a huge dog fan, loves dogs, and I think he wants to see Douglas.
oh yeah, I figured Laura wasn't here and Douglas would be taking Laura's place.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, he is ready. He's mic'd up, ready to go. Let me see if
Yeah,
I can get him. Douglas, can you see him? Oh, hold on.
let me see.
Hold. I'm gonna bring him over here. Come here. Come here. Come on. We gotta say hi. Say hi to the podcast. He's so big.
Hello,
Douglas.
Douglas. It's Uncle Ed, the kitty's friend, the doggy's friend. Boy, you're a big dog.
Yeah, he's large.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm trying to get. Okay, here we go. Now I got all of you on here.
Wait, Ryan just messaged me that you need headphones, but Ryan, why? He's typing. I don't
That
know.
I need headphones. I'm fine.
Oh. I don't think you can hear that on there, Ryan. Whatever. It's fine. Okay.
Mm, wait, first I want to hear about your guys' trip. How was it?
Well, I'll leave it to Mallory.
Wait 1 sec. Ryan, right? Can you come here? I'm right here. I'm in the room.
What you say.
Yeah.
Brian? Yes, yes. Come here, come here.
Okay, well, do you have headphones?
No,
Well, then what's your plan?
think we could just go for another run.
Well, but do you think it will impact the recording?
I don't know. If there's, I don't know. Okay, whatever.
Okay. Basically, what Ryan's saying is that he's in the living room, he can hear me, and then he can hear you. But I can't tell if he thinks it's annoying or if he thinks it affects the podcast.
I see. I'm guessing we're far enough apart.
I think so too.
I don't hear you at all. It's a good
Yeah.
observation, but
I'm gonna just I put um a shirt underneath the door just so that no sound would get out. So I'm gonna just put that back because he just opened it.
perfect.
Sitting on the floor.
Guys, I'm preparing to go to Japan in 2 days.
Oh,
And
cool.
I'm really excited, but getting in to Japan right now with COVID and stuff is just very stressful. And there's just so many like, obviously important and will respect the rules. However, I can't figure out what tests I need. It's like a bunch of different kinds of information.
Yeah, it's still a challenge traveling internationally. We're looking at going to Spain, and there's still COVID restrictions there too. So
Yeah.
I don't know. But having said that, I know a lot of people have been to Europe, not Japan, obviously. So they're traveling. So somehow it's got to work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just scary because, like, if the test doesn't come back before
Yeah,
your flight leaves, you're not leaving.
yeah, yeah.
Which, like, what? No, I get it, but I'm just need it to be figured out.
Yeah. Okay, so I didn't really tell McKenna at all what we were going to talk about, Dad. So just briefly, the main thing is, Dad's experience with the Parks and Rec Committee and with the Ventura Land Trust, and how having access to outdoor spaces has benefited and made his life better. Is that what
Cool.
we decided on, Dad?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you can go anywhere you want with that.
And you can go anywhere you want with that, you know?
And I most likely will.
Yes.
So you're not actually recording the podcast yet, correct?
Well, we are, but it was more just so that I could say my funny shit at the beginning.
Okay, all right. You can
this part won't be in.
Okay.
Because
right.
We edit it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Do you want me to intro Makena?
Yes, please.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fuck Wellness. I am Mallory.
And I'm Makena.
And I'm Ed.
Dad, do you want to be Laura today?
Yeah, I thought I was.
Yeah. And where's Douglas for his intro?
Well, hopefully he stays quiet. So
yeah. Well, as you may have gotten from that little interruption, my father, Ed Wehan, is here on the podcast. And I'm excited because I think he thinks he was our last choice, but he wasn't.
No way.
And we're very excited to have him today to talk about his experience in the outdoors, and both on like a personal and professional side. So welcome to the pod, Ed.
Thank you, Mallory. Douglas.
Oh my gosh. Well, Dad, you were on the podcast pretty much in the first 4 months of our podcast ever existing. So I'm guessing most of the listeners have not, heard from you since, or have not listened to that episode. So do you want to give just maybe like a 2-minute brief life, bio for everyone?
Yeah, I'm trying, let's see where to go with this. Obviously, I'm Mallory's father, and therefore somewhat of an elderly father, but still a relatively active one as well. So I was brought up in the San Fernando Valley primarily at a time when open space and being outdoors was pretty common because it was so accessible. So I was brought up there, went to UC Santa Barbara, went to graduate school at the University of Southern California, worked for the province of Ontario, Canada for 10 years, so traveled extensively in Canada.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
we did. Love Canada.
I love Ontario. Yeah, I love Canadians as well, having worked with them for 10 years.
We too love Canadians.
Yeah. So, I did that. We ran our own business, our small businesses for a while, ended up at Decker's Outdoor Corporation, which is an outdoor footwear company. Was fortunate spending 10 years there, left there. Mallory was fairly young, so I was able to be involved at a very close level with her education, being involved in the schools, helping with fundraising, all of that type of thing. And then I spent 16 years at that point on the City of Ventura's Parks and Recreation Commission, and on some other committees and commissions as well throughout the city. And most recently with the Ventura Land Trust, which is an amazing story by itself. And then I also serve currently as the chair of the board of directors of the Ventura Visitors and Convention Bureau. So that's pretty much my summary. I mean, I was always active. I was a tennis player in college, and afterwards, when it was tough to tote a tennis racket around while I was traveling on business, I took up running, and with much of the same compulsive personality that I played tennis with, I ran. And so my distances tended to get longer and longer as I spent more and more time at it, and eventually culminated in a bunch of 100-mile races. So that took me outdoors, obviously, doing
Dad,
all that.
I'm glad you're admitting that you have a compulsive personality.
Well, I thought I'd already done that, but apparently not.
Anyway. Dad, did you ever watch Parks and Rec, the TV show?
Not really. I might have seen an episode or two of that, but no, I never really did watch it. Probably in the context of this question and this interview, I probably should have spent some time watching it. But
Well,
no,
because I think,
It's actually required.
yeah, actually,
Yeah.
this was required watching for this podcast. No, I kind of feel like your Ventura's Leslie Knope. Like, I kind of feel like, Leslie Knope is the main character on Parks and Rec, and she's just like you, except maybe a little bit more obnoxious at times. but she has the drive to make her city the best it possibly can be, and I feel like you've had that throughout your career.
Thank you. I think
You're so formal. Thank you.
being a member of the Parks Commission, obviously I've seen some evolution in what's happening in our parks, but also certainly an acknowledgement that people who were there before me within the city, within the Parks Commission, city staff, and the history of our city, really set up the framework in our city for parks and recreation programs that made sense for our population. And I think they did a good job. As a Parks and Recreation Commissioner, you sort of deal with issues that come up over time, and how certain issues relate to the parks. For instance, one being we had a rifle pistol range up on one of our hillsides. And because that was sort of part of the parks aspect, that whole issue came before us. Well, as you can imagine, there were pretty strong feelings on both sides of that. And the rifle range really impacted the west side of our city, which was the more economically disadvantaged side of our city. And so there were a lot of issues on what to do with that. And so we had huge audiences. We had to move into city council chambers to deal with it all. But we eventually, through good research on our part and working with Ventura Police and everybody else, resolved that whole issue. But that was, a major one. There is several that are like that. But again, getting back to our parks are important. And here in Ventura, we're also a coastal city. So we may have formal parks like most people know, but we also have beaches. And a lot of the beaches are state beaches, but there's also local beaches as well, city beaches. And so some of our parks border on that. And some of the issues we have to deal with have to do with our beaches as well. So
why do you think people should care about parks?
Not everyone has access to open space and opportunity that I had when I was young. And having that experience probably taught me the value of many people having access to parks. So I think that parks are important to the well-being of a community, to the ability of people in areas that don't have big open spaces to be able to go and participate, to run, to jump, to hide, to seek, to do things, that obviously they can't do at home. Somewhere in this podcast, I'll try to differentiate a little bit between, parks and open space. But, whether we talk about city parks, county parks, state parks, or national parks, that's all an effort by our government to provide opportunities to people to be outdoors. And obviously for you, another whole podcast could be the mental well-being of being outdoors and being active. I mean, there's very little argument against all of that. Having said that, many people are constrained because they don't have the opportunity to get out there in the same way that many of us do. So parks are very important to that. We try to put them strategically around the city. When we build, when cities extend and move out into new areas, parks always come into city planning, or they should. Builders need to take parks and open space into account when they build things so that people who buy in those residential communities have some access to them. So all of that comes into play, and it's all important to the well-being of the community.
When you're talking, or is it a conversation talking about the current situation with housing and how we're expanding and maybe people not having access to their own outdoor spaces in a home? Is that part of the conversation in terms of the importance of parks and open space as well?
I think increasingly, Makena, that is the case. I was fortunate to be brought up in an area where open space was available, dirt roads were available, walnut groves were available.
Well, and you had a huge backyard too. So like physically on your property, you had that space as well.
No, and I mean, all of that's true. But I guess my point would be both on my home as a child and where I lived, you can go back there today and you'd say, what are you talking about? Because everything's been subdivided. There's where we lived is now a huge home. Places I used to go and play naturally are now homes. They're now been subdivided. To your point, Makena, you need homes, you need housing. The way to do that, and the big argument you see nowadays is in many ways to go up and to provide smaller places to people live, but more compact to get more people in. Mm-hmm. So all of that, doesn't bode well for a person's mental state if they don't have an opportunity to go up. And that's why it's so important. Parks are so important to be a part of any planning within a city. So
I wish I knew more about Colorado's open spaces because we have so many, and I just feel really uneducated about how we're protecting those spaces.
Yeah, that it's a good thing. I guess I can address probably our areas a little bit, and it probably pertains to your areas because part of what we deal with also are public lands. And Colorado has a lot of public lands, as does California, but it's concentrated in more areas. When you're dealing with public lands, you're dealing with issues having to do with the populations want to be able to access those public lands and what they want to do with them, whether they want to be able to continue to have their cattle roam on the public lands, whether they want to be able to take their off-road vehicles on the public lands, whether you just want to hike and being outdoors and enjoy what you have there. So there's various uses that tend to butt up against each other. And people advocate one way or the other. Open spaces, which Colorado probably has, some have often are I don't want to say they're private, but they're nonprofits. They are land trusts, many of them throughout this country. There's a national land trust organization that many of these cities and organizations belong to, where you're dealing with, thousands of acres of land that for the most part are public access, and they're managed for the use of the public and protected from constraints that might, or challenges that might exist in like public lands or other places. So there's the great value to open space, especially through the land trusts, is there's a difference between public parks for the most part and open space. We talk about the parks. We've all been to parks, and we know for the most part when we go to parks, the kids, Mallory, probably yourself, Makena included. There's swings, there's merry-go-rounds, there's slides. You go to play in the parks. There may be basketball hoops. There's all of these kinds of things. They are all so valuable. On the other hand, open space there isn't any of that. And so when you're young, when you're old, when you're out in open space, but when I reflect back on being young myself, you create your own reality in open space. A park sort of assists you in that reality by you being on a swing or a merry-go-round or a baseball diamond or a basketball court. You walk you walk out into the Santa Monica Mountains. When I was a kid, there was nothing there. There was a dry creek bed, and we just walked up the dry creek bed, and we didn't know what you didn't know what was around the next corner. You didn't know if there'd be a bobcat or a mountain lion. In our case, I saw once, or rattlesnakes or quail, whatever it was. You were exploring. If you're a young kid, you were Daniel Boone, you were Davy Crockett, you were whoever it was. But that's the way you thought. It was, creating a reality, a freedom of thought that that day at that time, you were an explorer, and there was a risk reward that you don't see in public parks. I mean, you get up there, you can trip, you fall. You don't trip and fall too much in a public park, but you're a kid, you're climbing a tree, you fall out of the tree. That's part of what you do and how you learn, and that's the value of open space a little bit, is that you learn, you test yourself a little bit. There's the unknown. What's around that corner? What's around the next corner? Can I get up this? Can I get down that? It's a wonderful experience. Now, we are fortunate in some ways now that with our public access open space, we put trails in. But it's the same type of thing even on those. If you go up the trails, you don't know what's around that corner. And again, here, even in Ventura, we're fortunate to have a tremendous amount of open space, and you go around the corner and there's hawks, and there's bobcats, and there's quail, and there's a coyote. You're not at a zoo, you're out in the wild, and it's a wonderful feeling.
Can you explain what a land trust is?
Yeah, to a certain degree, I can. I served on the Ventura Land Trust board of directors. It's a nonprofit organization whose mission is to acquire, protect, and sort of nurture an area of property. The Ventura Land Trust has recently acquired in back of Ventura 2,200 acres called Harmon Canyon, which when it opened, I mean, people just you couldn't get in the parking lot. It was unbelievable how popular the thing was, and yet it never existed before. What did they do? A lot of people drove from all over the place to be able to come to this, but I don't think anybody anticipated the popularity. And fortunately, that organization has just acquired another 1,800 acres in back of Ventura, so that at this point in time, our whole hillsides in back of the city are basically owned by nonprofits. And at some point, we'll be able to connect all of that with trails and be able to protect it and manage it. So that's what land trusts do. They acquire, and they acquire the land through willing sellers. I mean, and the money doesn't necessarily come from the state or from your local city. There's a lot of fundraising involved. There's a lot of grants involved, obviously, as well, for benefits that land trusts provide. Protection of water in the canyons and elsewhere, the wildlife protection, trees and foliage. I mean, there's so much talk nowadays about the need for more trees, for the health of all of us. And so they work and they manage and do all of that. And amazing, that's a story in itself that I could go on and talk a lot about, are the people that do all of that. And I'm sure that's the case in Boulder. It was the case in Washington, D.C. going way back. They had some real innovators back there. You go back to New York City, Central Park with Frederick Olmsted building all of those things. There's some very fortunate, relatively progressive people that help with putting all of this type of thing together.
So you drew the distinction between public parks and open space, but I was kind of thinking about, all the agricultural land that we've been talking about the past couple of days. So, Dad and I went to Mammoth, and the first part of the drive is through all of these fields of agriculture. So, like thinking about strawberries, like lemon groves, that kind of stuff. And that is private land, but it still is open space, I would argue, because even though we may not have access to it, it still provides that open space, like aesthetically, for you to feel like you're in more of the outdoors. So how do you kind of draw that distinction? And maybe you could talk briefly about SOAR.
Yeah, I think in some ways you've drawn the distinction. But aesthetically, yeah, visually, yeah, it's a tremendous resource. And let's face it, it's an element of zoning. Here in our county, we have an ordinance called SOAR, Save Our Agricultural Resources, which we just renewed. And that's a tough vote because I believe it required a 2/3 vote of the community in order to do it. And what it mandates is that any development in agricultural areas requires a vote of the people. So all that property has always been zoned for agriculture. So nothing has changed. It's just that if you want to zone up, to a different type of zoning to allow multifamily housing or residential housing, you just need to you need the vote of the people. Otherwise, you end up, in my mind, like Orange County or other places that are peripheral to a city where they just keep building, building, building. Ventura County has decided for the most part to protect its agricultural resources, especially as many of them is where you were, are by the Santa Clara River, they're by areas, and they're just, we're a big producer of fruits and vegetables here. And just to be able to look out on that is really, really appealing. Having said that, when I was young, that existed where I lived, and it's private property, but boy, I spent a lot of time in some trees and some of those fields, and I'm sure that's probably the case too. And most of those farmers are pretty generous people. There is a balance. They want to protect their crops, and boy, no one should be out there picking those crops for sure. But sometimes as kids, you roam around there a little bit just to see what's happening, and it's wild country in a way, despite all the orange trees on it. So it's a valuable resource. We're very fortunate here and where I live to be able to have that.
Mal, sorry, did you have something? Nothing?
Well, I have questions, but if you have a question, go for it.
No, I'm okay. You go.
The one
okay,
thing.
Go ahead, Dad.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is that I look at is the concentration of people in so many of these cities, where younger people especially can't get out and do things as I was able to do as a child, which I sort of addressed there a little bit. And these organizations, whether it's in Boulder or it's in Ventura, provide that opportunity, not only to the disadvantaged community, but, to everybody throughout the community. And without those opportunities, you have a situation that's constrained. You don't have as vibrant as a community. And over and above that, that open space, as I say, it protects your water supplies. It protects, provides trees. It provides, animals that live up there. We always have bears, like at Harmon Canyon, that are roaming down, kind of a thing. If that open space doesn't exist, if you build more homes, they're forced into a smaller area, and eventually they're going to disappear. So that's a big, big plus. But there's other things that have been shown that open space increase the economic vitality of a community. You know, if you're buying a home and you got 2,000 acres just up the road where you can walk, you know, your home is a whole lot more valuable than it would be otherwise. So it increases the economic opportunities within the cities as well. I know from a tourism point of view that people now come to Ventura from other places because they can go to Harmon Canyon, or they can go to Mariano Ranch, which will be developed with trails here shortly. They can come, they can stay in our hotels, they bring their mountain bikes, they eat in our restaurants. You know, I know businesses who are members of our community who have contributed significantly to the Ventura Land Trust because they want their employees to be able to have this kind of opportunity as well. So there is a significant economic benefit to what open space can do and does do. So local governments just need to be supportive of this. And sometimes it's not easy. And I'll get back a little bit here to the land trust and the organization itself, the people involved who put, you know, all the time and energy into doing it. Our land trust goes back to 2003 to a group of people who decided, you know, to take up this cause. And for many years, probably for, if I look at it, 15 years, nothing happened or very little happened. Yet those people were out there, they put on concerts with Jackson Brown and other big name performers to raise money to keep the organization going. It was on their shoulders that the Ventura Land Trust, as we know today, has been able to accomplish what it's been able to do. So there are a lot of people, whether it's my organization, our organization, or others that are in Boulder or other places, but you have to appreciate what was done, you know, years ago to be able to totally understand what's available today.
So I know you can't totally answer this because it's not relevant necessarily to Ventura, but if you have someone's listening and they're like, wow, I didn't even know services like this existed, or that there are people who are organizing this protection, what's kind of the best step, do you think, that they could start to learn about being involved in their own local community?
You know, there is a National Land Trust nonprofit organization. I think you could probably Google that and it would come up and it would give you much more than I'm able to give you now. You could also Google, you know, Boulder Land Trusts or Des Moines, Iowa, you know, Open Space Land Trust. This information will come up and that will identify. I know that for Ventura Land Trust, that we do a lot with kids. We work with the schools, and so we bring tours of kids to hike up or work up the canyons, or some of our other properties are on the Ventura River. The kids can come, they can help clean up, they can plant milkweed, which, you know, helps monarch butterflies. So, you know, the involvement of all these, you know, organizations that involve the kids and bring them to these places is really, really helpful. But to that point, you can volunteer. Boy, the Ventura Land Trust, any land trust needs volunteers because they're constantly trying to raise money, obviously, just to be able to build a trail. To build a trail costs a lot of money, to do a lot of the things that they do. But a lot of other things need to get done, and without volunteers, that's not going to happen. So, and there's a lot of people, trust me, that I know that just love the concept of open space. But it's Mallory and I years ago, we worked down the Ventura River for the land trust, removing arundo and, you know, in homeless areas to clean the whole places up. And, you know, you need to have people. It's an opportunity to get outside, but also to contribute back to the community.
Dad, watch not slamming your hand on the desk.
Yes. I get a little excited.
Gesticulate wildly. Yeah, I just wanted to add here that I feel like one thing we haven't talked about a ton yet this month is how important like parks and having access to public lands are for like community connection. Like I think about if you go to Arroyo Verde, which is a park in Ventura, on a Saturday or Sunday, there are probably 20 different parties of people throwing birthday parties, like having barbecues, like hanging out, doing a picnic. And I think it's so important to have those kind of spaces to bring people together to celebrate things. You know, Mom and Lee had their rehearsal dinner at Arroyo Verde. And I think about Arlington too. Like there's a really cool park near where I live that has picnic tables and just a lot of spaces for people to come together. And I think that's maybe an underrated great part of these kind of access is, to your point, Dad, about young people living in cities. Like oftentimes there's not connection points like that if you're living in a neighborhood that's only high-rise buildings. Whereas if there's a park, like there's an automatic place that is kind of a center of connection for a neighborhood, which I really like that piece of it.
No, you're right, and we worked on that in Ventura. You always look at those areas of your city that need parks, and our west side really needed a park, and we were able to, with some volunteers and stuff like that, to be able to do it. I guess one thing I would say is that even volunteering and stuff for anybody, don't take your parks for granted. You know, your cities hopefully have built them. You can get involved even at that level to help support them, but you can't take them for granted. And most cities have a nonprofit arm to their parks and recreation programs. People, you can volunteer and you can help at the local level to work in your parks, to help clean those parks up, or to work especially with young people that are coming to those parks. And there's a lot of that going on. I know a lot of fourth graders go to our parks, you know, to reenact some of the history of our city, and they learn about our city, but they're outdoors and they're doing that type of thing. So don't take your local parks for granted. I mean, I love what we're accomplishing with open space, but it's built on the back of cities being able to provide, you know, adequate amount of regular city parks. So whether they're city parks, again, they're county parks, or they're state parks, they're all worth your effort, and they're worth your energy to protect them, because you know there are forces that want to change them a little bit, I think, and not always for the better. So be a part of moving all of that forward.
So, Dad,
Yeah.
I know that the last few days we had a lot of conversations about dogs. And I know that this is something that you are particularly passionate about, is how people with dogs should behave when they are in these outdoor open spaces. So I'm sure that we have a lot of listeners with dogs. And so as someone who I know is particularly passionate about this, how would you like dog owners to behave when they are in open spaces or parks?
You know, I think there's a couple points here. One, there are laws, and there are regulations. Respect those. And a lot of that has to do, you know, there are leash laws. Like here in Ventura, there are leash laws. I don't think dogs are allowed on state beaches, but they are on city beaches as long as they're on a leash. But I think almost every day you can see a lot of dogs that are not on leash. And so what is the impact of that? Well, you have the opportunity of seeing, you know, pelicans, snowy plovers, birds, wildlife, or dogs chasing them. And the birds are going to fly away. So you're not going to see the birds. You know, you're not going to see the wildlife. But if your dog is constrained and you're in an area where it's allowed, you know, obviously that's what you want to do. You want to get your dog out there and you know, move along with it. But there's an upside to dogs and there's a downside. When at in open space, it's the same type of thing. I know the Ventura Land Trust has allowed pets, dogs for, I think it's the first mile and a half of the canyon going up where you can have dogs. Again, they need to be on leash. And above that, they're not allowed anymore. And the reason is there's people go up there hiking to see coyotes, to see bobcats, to see quail, to see potentially a bear, a deer. But if your dog is running off leash, that probably is not going to occur. So those are the constraints. It's the same thing that we've seen, in Mammoth in the backcountry. On the John Muir Trail several years ago when I was hiking, it seemed like every third person had a dog. And many of the dogs weren't on leash. That I saw no deer, I saw no wildlife during that whole time. I mean, once I got off of where I was, it was much, much better. But there's upsides and downsides to it. I don't know, Makena, whether you might have an observation or thought on that or a question, but that's what my thoughts are, on pets in open spaces and beaches and places like that.
I don't have any thoughts really. I think a lot of people don't understand that sometimes leash laws are in place to protect the land, not necessarily because they don't want, dogs off leash. Colorado is really pretty good about dog spaces. They have these things that are like voice and sight recall tags. And if dogs have voice and sight recall tags, meaning they listen to the command, you're able to have them off in more places. And so I think that's probably a pretty fair situation. You have to pay for those tags. And so I'm hoping that that payment benefits something. So yeah, I mean, but like Douglas is not voice and sight recalled right now. So he in most places cannot be off leash, but there also are a lot of other open spaces that are specifically for dogs. And so Colorado, I think, is a very dog friendly state. I think pretty much a very high percentage of people that live here have dogs. And so there's a lot of support systems in place for that.
Yeah, I think Ventura is very dog friendly. We're a dog friendly city. Some of our hotels are set up to be able to do that type of thing. Yeah, and I think there are ways to do it. The challenge, as I've always said before, is probably 80-90% of dog owners are very, very responsible.
Mm-hmm.
It's those that percentage that you run into and the dog's off leash and they always say, well, my dog is just fine. It's not going to really do anything. But that person with their dog off leash is telling another dog owner, let's say with a pit bull or something, well, your dog can be off leash too. Why can your dog be off leash? If mine can't. So, it's a matter of consistency of laws, but it's also a matter of following what laws there are out there. And fortunately, I think they are getting better at methods of being able to control pets, especially outdoors, as you suggested, Makena, and all of that's positive for everybody, I think. I don't know, Mallory, does that cover it? I don't know what.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think it's just important to obviously respect the local laws, but we were talking a lot this weekend about how joyful it can be to bring your dog in the outdoors and experience its joy. Just seeing Douglas run in the water was one of the most joyful things I've seen in my whole life. And so there's absolutely reasons to do that, but I think trying to be as respectful and conscious of its impact on the environment as well, which I think Makena does, a wonderful job of, but not everyone does. So it's important, to be mindful of that.
Yeah.
I think there's, to that point, I think there's joyfulness all around. And there's joyfulness to the dog owner going out there and having that happen. But that could potentially impact the joyfulness of the birder, the Audubon person who's out there trying to look at birds, or somebody else who's hopes to be able to see a bobcat come around the corner and stuff. So yeah, that's why we respect the laws and we have laws.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Dad, do you want to just briefly maybe talk about some of your favorite outdoor spaces and what you love about them? And it doesn't have to be like public parks. Like it can be really anywhere that you've been that is an outdoor space that you feel like you've enjoyed or has benefited you.
oh wow. Well, geez, that the challenge in that one is, I'm fortunate that I'm able to spend a lot of time outdoors, and being a runner. I mean, that's the nature of being a runner, right? You're outdoors, and being a trail runner probably even allowed me more opportunity that way than it might a normal person. But as far as specific places, boy, I could go on and on forever. But the Grand Canyon is certainly one place that, if you can spend any time, it's well worth seeing. I've been there, I don't know how many times. I've backpacked down it. We've river rafted down it. And every time I pull up to the edge of that canyon, I look out there, I just cannot believe that this place exists. So out of every geologic wonder I've seen in the whole world, the Grand Canyon is certainly one of the most special places I've ever been. Um, I could go on, something as simple as Mallory and I have hiked the Ray Lake Loop up in the Sierras out of Kings Canyon National Park. It's just a pretty simple 44-mile loop, and it's around every corner. There's something new. The river changes, the sky changes. More often than not, it's going to pound thunder and lightning on us, but everything changes, and it provides challenges, opportunities, passes to go over. There are places like that for many of us, to explore. Internationally, gosh, going to Machu Picchu, on the Inca Trail. Machu Picchu is an amazing place to go, and there's down in southern South America, at Fitzroy and Torres del Paine National Parks. Um, there's just beautiful places in all these countries. South America has tremendous ones, obviously in Asia, whether it's Everest Base Camp or Annapurna. You know, as much let's face it, the three of us are relatively privileged people, that we have opportunity to be able to do it, which makes that whole concept of local open space and parks even more important. Just if people have a taste of what it's like out there, if they eventually get the opportunity, they're not going to be fearful of perhaps going to South America and going to Tierra del Fuego or wherever it might be, to see even more and more and expand the horizons. So, yeah, every place I go, there's open space, and it's always a wonder.
Any final thoughts, Dad, before we close? Anything you want to add or make sure that the listeners know?
Well, probably Douglas probably has a question, but he's been a little
He's
reticent.
fast asleep,
Yeah.
but he can confirm that he loves open spaces.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, the only other thing I would get back to is appreciate what you have. And I start with your own little local parks, that little park up on the corner from wherever you live. Feel fortunate that you have it, you utilize it. It's quiet, it provides time for reflection, but a time for physical activity too, which I think is important in all of these places. Your parks, your national parks, boy, sometimes they're under threat, and our ancestors, the people who built this country, who built all those things, unbelievable. And finally, I just say, be willing to volunteer, be active in your local organizations, your local land trusts, your local parks, your local entities to support all of those things. It's you that makes the difference. If you don't do it, we're going to lose it. So that's where I would leave things, I think.
Yay.
That was great, Dad.
This is so informative.
Yeah.
Well, I think hopefully there are people who know much more about this than I do. And as you go forward, I know you're probably going to be able to bring some of those people on board too to expand on some of this. So, but much of what we do is personal, and it's, hey, what have you done that's interesting that can be conveyed to others to make it seem important. And I think the Santa Monica Mountains was what got me going, and I think they're places for everybody, to draw from and to enjoy the outdoors.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dad, for coming on the podcast. We will also link my dad's first episode on the podcast.
Ooh.
So in case you want to listen to that one as well. And
I have a question, a random question. Ken. Ed, how are you feeling about the upcoming wedding?
It was interesting because we were in Mammoth, and I found at least 5 really good locations for the wedding. Every time,
and he pointed them all out.
I made sure Ryan saw them. It could have been like at the Mammoth Brewing Company. They had a little stage, and I thought, there you go. You got a stage right there. There you got the Mammoth Brewing Company right behind it. So, I'm excited about all of this. We'll see when it happens. Mallory has known to balance out when it will be to my fishing trips. So,
I have very clear dates I have to choose from based off of Dad's fishing trips.
Yeah. But we're looking forward to it. And I look at, I get Ryan in this thing, but I get Makena, I get Laura, I get Douglas. This just is not Ryan coming aboard, apparently.
Yeah, it's my chosen family.
And all of a sudden it's growing significantly. So that's how I see it, Makena.
Aww.
Okay, I'm gonna cry, so we should close.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode as well as our other outdoor spaces episodes, and we will see you next week. Yay. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Ed.
Goodbye. Thanks, Makena.